There are moments in life when people don't just remember who you used to be, they use it against you. They take the worst chapter of your story and try to pretend it's the whole book. Maybe you felt this before. Maybe someone looked at you and said, I know who you really are, even though they haven't seen the storms you've survived, the mistakes you've corrected, or the battles you fought alone in silence. I want to start with something real. There was a man who spent years fighting alcohol addiction. He almost lost his marriage, his job, and even the respect of his own children. But he turned his life around. He went to therapy, embraced discipline, rebuilt trust, and stayed sober for 7 straight years. Yet every time he upset a family member, they would say, don't forget who you are. They weren't talking to the healed man standing in front of them. They were talking to the broken version he had already buried. This is what it feels like when your past is used as a weapon. The world tries to judge you by the person you no longer are. Another example, a woman who had a child at a very young age. People whispered, they mocked her. They predicted she would never amount to anything. She ignored them and pushed forward. She raised her child with love, went back to school, graduated at the top of her class, built a business, and created a beautiful life. But even in her success, someone would say, remember how irresponsible you were? They used her past to make themselves feel superior, not realizing she had turned her pain into power. And like Marcus Aurelius said, the opinion of others is only noise unless you choose to let it enter your soul. She refused to let the noise in. And maybe your story is similar. Maybe you've healed from anger, from insecurity, from a mistake you learned from a lifestyle that no longer reflects who you are today. People often cling to the old version of you because it makes them comfortable. Epictetus taught that when others bring up your past, they are revealing their own fear of growth. They need you to stay small so they don't have to face the truth about themselves. Even Einstein faced this. Before people called him a genius, they mocked him. Teachers labeled him slow, unfocused, and incapable. Years later, those same judgments looked foolish. His past didn't define him, it refined him. It taught him how to think differently. And like Einstein, you are allowed to grow beyond the expectations of people who never understood you. So before we go deeper, I want you to listen to this entire message. Not because it's just another motivational speech, but because it will give you the emotional mastery to answer anyone who tries to use your past to limit your future. And if you want more content that strengthens your mind and elevates your character, subscribe to The Inner Fortress. This channel is for people who refuse to be defined by old versions of themselves. Take a breath. Stand tall in who you've become. Now let's continue. 1. There comes a moment in every person's life when someone tries to chain them to a version of themselves that no longer exists. It may be a mistake you made years ago, a weakness you outgrew, or a season of your life you've healed from. When someone tries to weaponize that past, the emotional sting can be sharp, even if you've already forgiven yourself. A man once told the story of how an old friend mocked him for who he used to be in front of others. He felt small for a moment, until he remembered a line inspired by Marcus Aurelius. I am not who I was, I am who I choose to be today. And that is exactly what you say when someone tries to trap you in old chapters. You don't argue, you don't defend, you simply claim your present identity. When your past is used against you, say with calm strength, that version of me no longer exists. I've grown, and that's something I'm proud of. These words disarm the attack without fighting the attacker. They show maturity, self-awareness, and dignity. One of the most painful situations is when your growth threatens the people who knew you before you changed. They pretend your evolution is fake. They pretend your progress is temporary. They pretend they know the real you. Seneca warned that many people judge others by who they were because it is easier than facing who they themselves have become. A woman who once battled insecurity experienced this with her own family. She had healed, learned boundaries, and found her voice. But her sister said, don't act like you've changed. In that moment, she wanted to explode, but instead she breathed deeply and said, I respect my past, but I no longer live there. If you want to speak to me, speak to the person I am now. This statement is powerful because it shifts responsibility. It tells the other person, update your understanding of me, or stop speaking about a stranger. Epictetus taught that no one has the right to label you by a story you have already rewritten. When confronted, your best response is calm clarity, not emotional reaction. There was a young man who made one mistake in his teenage years, one wrong crowd, one bad decision, one arrest that changed everything. He rebuilt his life completely, but some people kept reminding him of who he really is. Their goal wasn't honesty, it was control. Their words were meant to shrink him. And then he discovered something that changed him forever. Your past only humiliates you. When you hide from it, when you grow from it, it becomes your power. So when someone said, don't forget where you came from, he calmly replied, I don't hide my past. I outgrew it. What matters is who I am today. This response carries the spirit of Epictetus, who believed that mistakes become wisdom when you learn from them. If someone tries to define you by your past, simply say, "My past is a lesson, not a label." If you're still stuck on it, that's your journey, not mine. This is emotional mastery, clarity without anger, confidence without aggression, peace without retreating. Even great minds experience this. Before Einstein became a symbol of genius, he was dismissed as slow and incapable. People imposed their opinions on him, trying to weaken his potential. If he had taken their words personally, the world would have lost one of its brightest lights. His silent answer to them was simple. He let his growth speak louder than their memory of his beginnings. That is the same energy you carry. When someone brings up your past, you don't plead, beg, justify, or over-explain. Your answer is grounded, calm, and self-respecting. You say, "I honor who I was, but I refuse to be defined by it. Growth is my truth now." And if they keep pushing, you finish with the most powerful line inspired by Marcus Aurelius. "If you still see the old me, that's because you haven't evolved. Not because I haven't." This statement ends the conversation without hostility. It places the burden of outdated perception where it belongs, on the person still living in yesterday, while you have already stepped into tomorrow. 2. There are people who bring up your past not because they want truth, but because they want control. They keep those old stories alive because they feel safer when you remain small. This is especially common when you start improving your life. Your confidence grows, your habits mature, your mindset sharpens. They feel the shift. They see your progress. And instead of celebrating they respond with reminders of who you used to be. A man once said his uncle would always remind him of the time he failed his exams in secondary school. Even after he earned a degree, secured a job, and built a life he was proud of, his uncle would still say, "Don't forget, you used to be unserious." One day, instead of getting angry, he answered with a line inspired by Seneca's calm wisdom, "Yes, I remember. It's the reason I became better. That past made me strong, not stuck." When you respond this way, you show emotional intelligence. You reveal that the past no longer holds power over you. You make it clear that you are not running from your history, you are using it as fuel. Sometimes the people who use your past against you are the ones who fear losing the version of you they were comfortable with. Your growth forces them to confront the ways they have refused to evolve. A woman who used to be shy and overly apologetic became a confident, outspoken professional. But her friends constantly teased her. "You? Confident? Please, don't pretend." The teasing wasn't harmless. It was an attempt to drag her mentally backward. She remembered a teaching from Epictetus. People don't react to you, they react to the meaning they attach to you. Her growth meant they had to face their own lack of progress. So she responded with quiet authority, "I'm not pretending. I've simply stopped dimming myself to make others comfortable." That single sentence changed the entire energy of the room. And when someone insists on seeing the old you, there's another line she used that you can use too. "If you still see my past, that's because you're not paying attention to my present." This is emotional mastery, firm, calm, and free of resentment. There was a man who grew up in a neighborhood known for crime and violence. He escaped that life through discipline and relentless effort. Yet every time he returned home, someone would say, "Don't act like you're better than us." It wasn't about arrogance. It was about boundaries. He no longer wanted to be defined by an environment he worked so hard to transcend. Einstein faced something similar. Before the world celebrated him, many mocked his unusual way of thinking. They tried to hold him to labels he had outgrown. If Einstein had responded emotionally, his potential would have shrunk. Instead, he let his truth rise above the noise. Inspired by this, the man answered those old voices with calm strength. "I'm not better than anyone. I'm just better than who I used to be." It's a statement grounded in humility and growth. And when someone tries to hold you to old surroundings, the best thing to say is, "Where I came from shaped me, but it no longer defines me." This is how you break free without disrespecting your roots. The deepest emotional wound occurs when someone uses your past in moments of vulnerability. Maybe you opened up about your mistakes, your healing, your evolution, and they later weaponized that honesty against you. This feels like betrayal. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal in his own intimate circle, yet he refused to become bitter. His wisdom teaches that you do not need to match someone's pettiness to maintain your dignity. A man once confided in his partner about his past anger issues from childhood. Months later, during an argument, she said, "This is why you'll always be the same." He felt shattered, but instead of reacting in rage, he paused, took a breath, and replied with emotional clarity, "I shared my past to show you where I've grown, not to give you a weapon. I won't let this define me again." That sentence protected his dignity. When someone uses your honesty against you, respond with, "My past is not my identity. My growth is," and if they continue, end the discussion with the strongest Stoic line of all. "If you choose to stay in my past, you'll lose access to my present." This is the voice of someone who knows their worth. 3. One of the hardest truths you will ever face is this. Some people keep your past alive because the healed version of you intimidates them. They preferred you when you were uncertain, unstable, confused, or insecure because your weakness made them feel stronger. But when you grow, when you evolve, when you become more disciplined, more calm, more focused, they feel threatened. A man who struggled with depression in his early 20s became healthier, more centered, and emotionally stable. But every time he set a boundary, someone would say, "Here you go again with your mood issues." One day he responded with a calmness inspired by Marcus Aurelius, "My past is where I learned. My present is where I live. I won't let you confuse the two." And the room went silent. When someone tries to attach you to old pain, your answer must remind them that you are not defined by the chapters you've healed from. You are defined by the strength that healing created in you. There was a woman who spent years apologizing for everything: her voice, her presence, her emotions, her needs. She finally found her confidence through therapy, journaling, and deep inner work. She learned to speak up without fear. But someone from her past mocked this growth and said, "Don't pretend like you're suddenly strong." She took a breath, remembered the teachings of Epictetus, and replied, "Strength isn't sudden, it's earned, and I earned mine." This statement held power because it came from a place of truth, not pride. When someone tries to use your old insecurity against you, speak with dignity. "I may have been uncertain before, but that's not who I am anymore. Respect my growth or step aside." People who cling to your past always expect you to shrink. Your calm assertiveness disrupts their control. Seneca said the strongest person is one who refuses to let others define their worth. When your past comes up, answer with identity, not explanation. Sometimes the attack comes from people who haven't seen you in years but assume they still know you. They build their perception of you from outdated memories, ignoring the fact that time transforms everyone. A man once ran into an old schoolmate who remembered him as the troublemaker. The classmate laughed and said, "I bet you're still the same." But the man had become a father, a mentor, and a community leader. So he looked at him and said, "You're speaking to a memory. Try speaking to the man in front of you." That single line broke the illusion. Einstein often said that people's opinions of him reflected more about their imagination than his reality. When someone projects the old you onto the new you, respond with clarity. "I've changed. If you haven't updated your understanding, that's your delay, not my identity." This shifts the burden back to them. You don't have to explain your growth to people who refuse to see it. You simply assert it. But the deepest emotional mastery comes when someone tries to use your past at a moment they think you are weak. Maybe during stress, failure, heartbreak, or exhaustion. They believe bringing up old wounds will destabilize you. A woman going through a divorce was told by her ex, "This is just like you. You always ruin things." The words cut deep because they targeted her pain. But she remembered something her therapist told her. The person you were during trauma is not the person you are in healing. So she responded with maturity. "That version of me was surviving. This version is evolving." Don't confuse the two when someone tries to use your lowest moment to define your present strength. The best response is, "My past was my teacher. My healing is my proof." And if they push further, end it with the most powerful truth of all, inspired by Marcus Aurelius: "I will not live in a story I've already outgrown." Saying this protects your peace and ends the conversation with dignity, not anger. 4. There is a unique pain that hits when someone pretends your past disqualifies your present. They act as if your growth isn't real, as if maturity is an act, as if healing is temporary. But emotionally strong people understand something most never learn. Your past is proof you are capable of transformation. A man who once struggled with poor financial decisions eventually became disciplined, responsible, and financially stable. But his cousin always brought up his old mistakes, saying, "Don't act like you've always been smart with money." One day, instead of defending himself, he responded with a line inspired by Marcus Aurelius: "Wisdom isn't about who I used to be. It's about who I chose to become." That statement shut the conversation down. So when someone tries to use your history to challenge your credibility, you say, "My growth is real, even if you're late to noticing it." This reminds them that their doubt is not your responsibility. There was a woman who once dated the wrong people, made impulsive emotional choices, and trusted the wrong friends. She healed from that phase, but someone who envied her new confidence brought up her past relationships to embarrass her. Instead of shrinking, she replied, "Those choices taught me what self-worth really looks like. I'm grateful, not ashamed." Her tone was calm, steady, unbothered. Seneca wrote that a wise person uses their past the way a traveler uses old roads, not to live there, but to understand the journey. When your romantic or emotional past is used against you, say, "I learned. I grew. I won't apologize for evolving. This sentence takes power away from the attacker, because growth is the one thing they cannot argue with. And if they continue pushing, finish with, the person who made those mistakes doesn't exist anymore. Speak to who I am, if you can. Maturity isn't about denying your past, it's about owning your growth so completely that insults fall flat. Sometimes your past haunts you not because it's still alive, but because people keep resurrecting it. A man who once struggled with anger issues as a teenager transformed himself through meditation, discipline, and emotional awareness. But his colleagues kept saying, "We know how you really are." They weren't talking to the healed man. They were talking to the wound he had already closed. One day he responded with the calm firmness of Epictetus, "My past reactions were symptoms, not my identity. I have outgrown them." And when someone laughed dismissively, he added, "If you prefer the old me, that's your problem. I prefer the man I've worked hard to become." That's what you say when people mock your evolution. Einstein once said, "The measure of intelligence is the ability to change." So when someone tries to hold you to who you used to be, respond with, "If I stayed the same, you'd call me foolish. Now that I've grown, you call me fake. Which one is it?" This exposes their inconsistency and frees you from their expectations. The most powerful emotional mastery appears when you choose self-respect or pleasing people who refuse to acknowledge your transformation. This is especially true when people bring up your past publicly, hoping to embarrass you. A woman who had a history of being overly reactive discovered deep emotional calm through Stoic principles. During a heated meeting, someone mocked her old reactions, hoping to trigger her. Instead, she took a breath and said, "I don't react like I used to. If you're expecting the old me, you'll be disappointed." Her voice didn't shake. Her presence didn't break. That's what inner work looks like. Marcus Aurelius taught that dignity is the quiet power that comes from knowing yourself. When someone throws your past into the room like a weapon, you calmly respond with, "I stand with who I am today. My past is a lesson, not a cage." And if the disrespect continues, you finish with, "I've outgrown that version of myself." If you haven't outgrown your need to repeat it, that's your journey, not mine. This is how emotionally mature people reclaim their power without raising their voice. 5. There comes a moment in your growth when you realize the people who bring up your past are often the ones who fear your future. They see your discipline, your confidence, your clarity, and something inside them becomes unsettled. A man who once lived recklessly transformed into someone stable, calm, and successful. But when he returned home for a family event, someone smirked and said, "You think you've changed, but we remember who you really are." His chest tightened for a moment. But then he remembered something Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." He had colored his soul with progress, not shame. So he looked at them and said, "You remember my beginning. I stand in my becoming. It silenced the room." And if you're listening to us, stay with me until the end, because what comes next will teach you exactly how to protect your peace. And while you're here, make sure you subscribe to the Inner Fortress so you never walk through your growth alone. There was a woman who once lived recklessly with her emotions. She reacted too quickly, trusted too easily, and apologized too often. Life taught her lessons in hard ways. She matured, healed, and rebuilt her self-respect. But people who knew the old her loved to remind her of her past decisions. One day, during a casual conversation, someone said, "You were really naive back then." But instead of shrinking, she remembered Seneca's wisdom that every mistake is simply a step toward wisdom. She smiled gently and said, "My past is not an insult to me. It is the reason I see clearly today." That sentence changed the tone of the entire room. And if anyone keeps bringing up your old wounds, you can calmly add, "If you're stuck in who I was, it means you haven't met who I've become." Stay with me. Do not click away, because this message becomes even more powerful in a moment. And if you haven't, subscribe now for more content that strengthens your mind and protects your peace. Sometimes people weaponize your past, not out of malice, but out of habit. They assume they still know you because they met an earlier version of you. A man who grew up in chaos became deeply structured, disciplined, and responsible. But when he returned to see old friends, they mocked him, saying, "You acting mature now?" He took a deep breath and answered with the dignity of Epictetus, "What you knew was a boy. What stands here is a man." It stunned them. When someone refuses to adjust their understanding of you, the best thing to say is, "Growth doesn't need your approval. It needs my commitment." Einstein once said that the world will always judge you by the version of you they prefer. So when someone brings up the past, say, "I honor my past, but I refuse to live in it." If you're listening now, stay with me. The final lines of this section will change how you respond forever. And make sure you subscribe to the Inner Fortress. Every week, I bring you deeper tools for emotional mastery and self-respect. The most painful attack is when your past is brought up in a moment when you're vulnerable. It feels like someone is pressing on an old scar, hoping to reopen the wound. A woman who once struggled with impulsiveness learned emotional discipline through therapy, journaling, and Stoic principles. But during a disagreement, someone snapped and said, "This is why you'll never change." She felt tears rise but refused to break. Instead, she centered herself and answered with strength inspired by Marcus Aurelius, "I have changed. The fact that you don't see it doesn't make it less true." And if someone tries to drag you back emotionally, this is what you say: "My past may explain me, but it does not define me. My growth defines me now." That is the voice of someone who refuses to surrender their dignity. And if they push again, end with, "If you continue speaking to my past, I will walk away to protect my present." 6. There are people who bring up your past because they need to believe you haven't changed. Your growth threatens their comfort. Your healing exposes their avoidance. Your discipline reveals their excuses. A man once said he used to be quick-tempered in his younger years, but after years of meditation and self-work, he became calm and steady. Yet, whenever he disagreed with his older brother, he would hear, "You've always had anger issues." That old label stung, not because it was true anymore, but because it was lazy. He knew the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, who said, "Look inward. The fountain of good is within you." So he looked inward and responded with emotional clarity. "My past reactions were not my identity. They were my beginning. I react differently now." When someone labels you with an outdated version of yourself, answer them with dignity. "You're describing who I was, not who I am." This shifts the conversation from defending yourself to calmly affirming your truth. There was a woman whose past mistakes were constantly used to make her feel inferior. She made unwise choices in her younger years. Wrong friends, wrong relationships, wrong priorities. She grew, matured, found direction, and built a better life. But someone from her past mocked her during a gathering, saying, "We remember how wild you used to be." For a moment, she felt embarrassment rising, but she remembered a quote from Seneca: "Every saint has a past. Every sinner has a future." With calm strength, she replied, "Yes, I had my struggles. And that is exactly why I'm strong today." The tone in the room shifted instantly. When someone uses your old mistakes to shame you, the most powerful thing you can say is, "I learned from it." Did you learn from yours? You're not being aggressive. You're being honest. And if they continue, you end the conversation with, "My past is a chapter. My growth is the story." Sometimes people bring up your past because they cannot handle your silence, your confidence, or your boundaries. Your growth disrupts how they expect you to behave. A man who used to tolerate disrespect finally learned to speak up. But the moment he set a boundary, someone said, "You've changed." He replied, "I changed because I needed to." His voice was calm, not defensive. This is emotional evolution. Epictetus wrote that people are disturbed not by events, but by their interpretations. What they call change is actually healing. When someone tries to dismiss your boundaries by mentioning your past, you say, "Growth is supposed to change me." And if they try to guilt trip, you follow with, "I no longer betray myself to keep others comfortable." Einstein lived this truth too. He outgrew environments, outgrew expectations, even outgrew people who couldn't understand the way he thought. When someone tries to limit you with old labels, you say, "If you're choosing to stay in my past, that's your limitation, not my identity." But the strongest emotional mastery comes from understanding that not every accusation deserves a defense. Sometimes silence speaks louder than explanations, especially when your growth is undeniable. A woman who once struggled with emotional instability became deeply grounded through spiritual discipline and Stoic teachings. When someone tried to belittle her by bringing up old memories, she paused, breathed, and simply said, "I don't live there anymore." She didn't argue, she didn't justify, she didn't explain, because explaining is for people who doubt themselves, not for people who know they've transformed. Marcus Aurelius believes strongly in the power of inner authority. When someone tries to drag you backward, you say, "I honor my past, but I refuse to be imprisoned by it." And if they push again, end the conversation with ultimate clarity. "The person I was taught me the person I am. If you can't see the difference, that's not my burden." This is what true emotional mastery feels like. Quiet strength rooted in undeniable transformation. 7. Before we close this journey, stay with me until the end. What you are about to hear now is the deepest truth about overcoming your past and facing people who refuse to let you grow. And if this message has strengthened your mind in any way, make sure you subscribe to the Inner Fortress right now. This channel is where emotional mastery becomes your daily habit. Now listen closely. The final stage of maturity is realizing that other people's memory of you is not your responsibility. A man once told the story of how people from his childhood always called him stubborn, reckless, impossible. But that was before he healed, before he found direction, and before he discovered self-discipline. Whenever they used those old labels, he felt the sting. But one day, he stood tall and said, "I am under no obligation to remain the person you remember." That became his shield. When someone insists on seeing an outdated version of you, say, "Your memory is not my identity." You do not owe anyone the smaller version of yourself. There was a woman who suffered from low self-worth for years. When she finally grew confident, someone said, "This confidence looks fake." She could have broken down. She could have doubted herself. But instead, she embraced the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius, who taught that the opinion of others is irrelevant if your soul remains honest. So she responded with grace, "My confidence looks fake to people who knew me before I found myself." That line disarmed the attack instantly. And if someone keeps using your past to question your authenticity, respond with, "My growth is not a performance, it's my evolution." Seneca taught that what matters is not where you started, but how you rise. When someone mocks your transformation, you remind them everyone has a past. Not everyone has the courage to grow beyond it. This is maturity. This is emotional strength. This is the voice of a person who has learned to stand firmly in their rebirth. There was a man who never believed he would become more than the struggles he came from. He grew up in poverty, made mistakes, struggled with self-discipline, and carried guilt for years. But he rebuilt his life piece by piece. One day, someone from his past laughed and said, "You're still that same boy." Instead of arguing, he remembered Epictetus' teaching that no insult can touch the person who knows themselves. So he answered with calm dignity, "That boy became this man." Respect the journey or step aside. That is what you say when someone tries to use your beginnings to deny your becoming. And if they push harder, say, "I refuse to let old stories define my new life." Einstein was once told he would never amount to anything. If he had accepted that judgment, the world would never have known his brilliance. You are the same. You owe no one the version of yourself they misremember. Your growth speaks louder than their imagination, louder than their gossip, louder than their outdated opinion of you. Now listen carefully to this final truth. The day you stop hiding your past is the day it loses its power over you. You don't have to erase anything. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to defend your mistakes or your journey. You simply have to stand boldly in who you have become. So when someone uses your past against you, you say, "I've already forgiven myself." Your judgment is unnecessary. And if they try again, you end it with the strongest truth of all. If you stay stuck in my past, you will lose the privilege of knowing my future. That is emotional mastery. That is Stoic strength. That is the voice of someone who refuses to be defined by what they have already outgrown. And before we end this message, if you want more content that strengthens your mind, protects your peace, and builds your character, subscribe right now to The Inner Fortress. Your new life is already waiting. Step into it fully, proudly, and completely free from the weight of who you used to be, finally. If you've made it to this moment, it means you're someone who refuses to let the past define the future. And I want you to hear this clearly. You are not the mistakes you made. You are the lessons you learned. You are not the wounds you carried. You are the strength that grew from them. You are not the person they remember. You are the person you decided to become. And nothing, absolutely nothing, has more power than that. So as you step forward into your life, carry this truth with you. Anyone who chooses to stay inside an old chapter of your story will never understand the greatness of the chapter you're writing now. Let them talk. Let them remember. Let them cling to yesterday. You are already walking into a better tomorrow. And before you go, if this message strengthened your mind, grounded your emotions, or gave you clarity, make sure you subscribe to The Inner Fortress. This is your space for emotional mastery, self-respect, and unshakable inner strength. New videos are coming that will elevate your thinking, sharpen your wisdom, and protect your peace. Take a breath. Stand tall. Walk forward with dignity. Your past is behind you. Your future is calling. Answer it boldly.